Good morning. My name is Terry Dowd, and I welcome you to this retreat sponsored by St. Columba's Episcopal Church. We want to begin with some housekeeping. We suggest that you use the speaker view instead of gallery view for the sessions today with Swami Chidbrahmananda. We suggest also that you turn off your video to give yourself more privacy. You may send a chat to me or to Marjorie Sweat if you have any logistical problem. The sessions today are in silence to listen to Swami C, so everyone else will be muted. And we want you to send your questions for discussion on Sunday to Marjorie by email, and she would like to get them by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. And then just as a reminder, our next session will be at 2 o'clock this afternoon. And you may attend Vespers tonight at 5 o'clock from Holy Cross Monastery in West Park, New York. And Swami C will be closing our sessions with a chant. And Marjorie will send you an email with information about the Vespers link and the translation of the chant that Swami C will be using. Now I have the privilege of introducing Swami Chidbrahmananda, or as he likes to be called, Swami C. Swami C is a Vedantist monk. Vedanta is a philosophy taught by the Vedas, the most ancient scriptures of India. Its basic teaching is that our real nature is divine. God, the underlying reality, exists in every being. Religion is therefore a search for self-knowledge, a search for the God within. Swami C has been a monk for 21 years. He spent 12 years in a monastery in San Francisco, a year in India and in Germany, a year in Hollywood, and he presently lives in Washington at the Vedanta Center in Silver Spring and has been there for the past 6 years. He recently spent 9 months living with the brothers at Holy Cross Monastery, an Episcopal Benedictine monastery in New York. He considers himself a Vedic Christian, faithful to the teachings of Christ. He recently delivered a paper on Vedic Christianity at Cambridge University in the UK at their College of Theology. He attended Abilene Christian University with a major in biblical studies, and then he set out to join a mission team planning to go to West Berlin. But instead, he ended up in San Francisco, where he lived for many years before becoming a Vedantist monk. In his words, "I do not consider religion to be plural, but instead that there is a single religion of which all traditions are a facet. I love to discuss spiritual ideals, and I'm always available for a good email exchange." So now I turn it over to Swami C.
Thank you, Terry. This is such a great time for me, really, so very exciting. Some of you remember a couple of years that I gave a Wednesday night class at St. Columba's, and being there, I mentioned at the time, was quite unnerving for me. I wasn't quite sure what to expect. I grew up in a very fundamental, very traditional church, the Church of Christ in the deep South. And if a Swami had ever walked in our doors, you don't know what would have happened. You have no idea. So when I walked into your class and just felt the camaraderie and the warmth with which I was received, and then the level of knowledge and study that I encountered, there were a couple of times during that series where I couldn't remember a reference, and after class, one of the devotees there came up to me and gave me the reference. I was so impressed by that, and you showed me a new Christianity that really set fire to my current direction in my journey. Shortly after that experience, I went up to Holy Cross to live for a year and to study with the brothers there and to kind of test some of the ideals that I picked up from the Vedanta, to share them and to discuss them and to see how they were received and whether they were, copacetic in a theological sense. And so I got to study a lot with those brothers and spend some great time and really make some new friends. And I have a warm connection in my heart for them and for Anglicanism or Episcopalianism in general, and a gratitude for showing me a Christianity that's wide open and so considerate and so I guess open-minded. Really is what I really enjoy in that. So as you know, I'm Swami C. I've been a Vedantist for 21 years. I really didn't have a Vedantic practice before that. I went to India for a 6-week vacation and ended up meeting some sadhus, some wandering monks in the mountains, and met with 5 of them in particular, and each one of them kind of unlocked a section of my heart, really. And I came back from that trip in cold turkey, joined a monastery, and I've been trying to figure out what I did for 21 years. And I have to say, I keep learning every day. So I'm thankful to you for being interested and excited to be invited and truly feel like I'm among friends. And I want you to know that if you do want to communicate at all, you should have my email address by now. If not, certainly it's available to you to communicate anytime that you want on any subject that you want for as long as you want or as short as you want. So please take advantage of that if you'd like. It would be a wonderful experience for me. Now, as was mentioned there in my little bio, I don't anymore, and certainly it will be less and less, I imagine, as I go on, recognize a difference of religions. I don't believe there's a plural. Part of it comes from the Vedas, the earliest scriptures known to man, say that religion is one, though the sages have called it by many names. And their idea, the idea that's presented there, is this idea of a gem called the Sanatana Dharma, the eternal Dharma, or the eternal right living, or the eternal quest for truth. And that gem has many facets, as gems do. And it says that each religion is a facet on that gem. So the full luster of the gem can be appreciated through any one of the religions, but no one of religion is the entirety of the gem. And as I've studied more and more over the years, it's quite a tall order to say that you've studied all the religions, since any one of them is a lifelong investigation. But certainly as I've sat amongst them and met many people from many different ones, I have found that there is something called a Sanatana Dharma in the middle of each of them. Now, as I'm talking here, I'm starting, this is not going to be a Vedantist session. I just kind of want to give you a perspective from where I'm coming from in the things that I say. And a very important component of that is that I am not telling you how things are at all. Anything that I have to say this morning is up to you, whether you want to accept it or discard it. There's no requirement and no expectation on my part. And as we read through Brother Lawrence here, as we kind of investigate these truths in a way I would call it scripture personally, but that I'm not going to approach it as a lesson. I'm not going to approach it as anything that you're going to be able to outline and take notes and say, this is the way that it is. And I don't really want to take that approach, because religion isn't of the mind. Religion is beyond the mind. And the technique that I have found most useful, especially for a silent retreat and for going deeper and for touching our beloved, is to let these teachings, let scripture wash through the mind like water. It's not something we're adding to the mind, because religion is not about adding information to the mind. Religion is an undoing. It's a removal of ignorance, a removal of wrong ideation and inaccurate thinking, so that that which is obvious can become apparent to us again. And so these teachings and this time with Brother Lawrence, as we read his letters and listen to his conversations, let them wash through you. And then after the class is finished, look at the condition of mind. Look at the residue that they leave behind. And that's the most beneficial way of taking a look at Scripture anytime that you read it. The Scriptures, I was told one time by Swami Tattwamayananda, Swami T, in San Francisco. I was helping him move into the monastery, actually. He had just been posted there. He's a very senior monk and of a very traditional Brahmin family. And I mean very traditional. In his home, they've had a hearth fire, which is a small fire, a yagna, that sits on his shrine and is continually burning. And the family continually tends to that fire. That fire is that which through they worship the divine. That fire has been burning continuously on his hearth in his home for 1,200 years. 1,200 years, that family has kept that same fire burning on the same shrine, in the same home, in the worship of God. And he comes to San Francisco, and I'm helping him move into the room. And I'm putting 14 volumes, these fat notebooks, 3-ring binders, on his shelf, all handwritten and all of them full. And I'm like, Maharaj, what is all of this? I mean, what? They're not marked or anything. And he just kind of offhandedly said, oh, those are just some of my unpublished works. And I didn't burst out laughing, but I began chuckling because, my unpublished works, which includes all my works actually, fits on a napkin, a cocktail napkin. And I was sitting there and I started talking to him about that. And he said something very important to me. He said, the Scriptures are not there to tell you anything of God. The Scriptures are there to tell you and show you what God is not, so that which is obvious can become apparent. And I understood something there, because it's part of our trouble and part of the reason that God is so abstract and so far from us. Because anytime we want to know something, we ask the mind. Anytime we want to understand something physically, we ask the body, how am I feeling? Am I hungry? And there's a presence of the divine that is there before the mind and before the body. And it's an unchanging hum of bliss and contentment, tranquility. But the mind, because it is always changing and flashing and dancing and moving around, keeps us constantly distracted, keeps our eyes on other things. And we are never aware of this, what has become white noise, this bliss of the presence of the beloved that is within us. And that all of the world that we see is that presence. And that world is a reflection of the image of God within, the I am. And you can see our delusion because we say the name of God many, 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 many times a day. Anytime we make a statement, I'm hungry, we've said God's name, I am. And then we've added an adjunct to it, hungry, tired, angry, jealous. And we don't even pay attention to the I am portion of that statement. All of our attention is on the verb of that statement. When we say, I'm hungry, we're paying no attention to the I am and all of our attention to the hunger. And that is why we can't or don't experience the presence of the beloved. And here we have Brother Lawrence, I almost called him Swami Lawrence, sharing a life that's completely different from that. Here is a man who somehow found the unmoving part of himself, the part that doesn't change. And somehow he managed to put his attention on white noise, as it were, and to come into relationship with that and be utterly changed. So that here we are 500 years later, reading the writings and conversations of a kitchen helper, a footman. That's the nature of knowing God, right? Nature of knowing God. A person who knows God is never forgotten. Whether it's a Jesus or a Buddha or a Rama or a Krishna, that knowing God is something the world never forgets, interestingly enough. So with all of that being said, I'm going to begin, as I traditionally do, with a reading from Hafiz, a Persian poet, Sufi mystic at the time. He says, light will someday split you open, even if your life now is a hard and rigid cage. For a divine seed, the crown of destiny, is hidden and sown on an ancient fertile plain you hold the title to. Love will surely bust you wide open into an unfettered, blooming new galaxy, even if your mind is now a spoiled mule. A life-giving radiance will come. The friend's gratuity will come. Oh, look again within yourself, for I know your soul was once the elegant host to all the marvels in creation. From a sacred crevice in your body, a bow now rises each night and shoots the moon into the sky. Behold the beautiful, drunk, singing one. From the lunar vantage point of love, he is conducting the affairs of the whole universe while throwing wild parties in a treehouse, on a limb, in your heart. I want to set the stage for approaching the beloved. It's a matter of knowing that the presence is there. God is never far from you. The ancient sages say that he's closer to you than your neck. One of the sages, Ramakrishna, said that God is so close to you, he can hear the anklet bells on an ant. So this is a fundamental axiom of faith, to know that God never, ever, 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 under any circumstance, leaves or abandons you. It is us that become unaware of the divine, become distracted from the divine. And when we try and find our way back, it's very difficult because we have objectified the idea of the divine. We've made it something that's in the mind or in the senses, and we go looking for it, and we can't seem to find it, and so it remains a matter of faith. But the fact is that it's the mind and it's the senses that are distracting you from the presence of your beloved. And so to remove ourselves from mind, remove ourselves from body for a moment, turn the entire body, including the mind, into a receptive sense organ, like the ears, like the skin. All of our other organs are receptive in nature. They feel and listen. The mind was intended for the same thing, but we use it for expression. We use it to contemplate or to think of or to analyze and build thought castles that we think are true. But the truth is fundamental to the mind, underlies the mind. It's not something built in the mind. And so today, when we approach the beloved, let the water of the experience of Brother Lawrence here, let the water of his words just kind of flow through. Hear them and feel them. Let them leave a lingering scent of perfume as the beloved walks through your awareness and becomes more and more and more present. It's always very important to know and to have faith that as soon as you sit to think of the beloved, that he's there. And so open up to an awareness of that. Don't go looking. Don't feel like, oh, I have to find that sensation or I have to repeat that experience. Experiences happen because of the presence. They are not the thing itself. So as soon as you quiet everything down, you'll hear the Bhagavad Gita, that celestial song, not that particular scripture, but you'll hear God, you'll hear the presence of the divine, you'll hear that lingering sweetness of love that is always yours. And that's the first place that we're going to start. As I go through today, I don't have an outline. I'm not presenting a series of philosophical thoughts. I'm just going to flip through the sayings of Brother Lawrence and just follow his adventure. So today, more than a class, imagine a walk through a divine wood, if you will, as we kind of look upon the things that our brother here has to say, and know that they are true for us as well, and to try and relax into the presence of God. God is not something we can go to. It's not like you see your mom and you go toward your mom. It's more like your mom is holding you, so she's behind you, you can't see her. So you don't look for her, you just settle into the embrace. You just accept the embrace of the mother. And so today we're going to take that attitude and that perspective and make that attempt. And hopefully some of these words and some of these ideas will remain as that scented perfume as the beloved walks through the room, for you to spend the rest of your day in silence, contemplating and enjoying that divine relationship. And I hope that in the sense that Hafiz presents it as playful and fun and sometimes mischievous, but certainly always adventurous, that becomes your experience of our brother Lawrence and his teachings. He begins with an interesting experience. He said that God had done me a singular favor once at the age of 18, that in the winter, seeing a tree stripped of its leaves, and considering that within a little time the leaves would be renewed, and after that the flowers and fruit will appear, I received a high view of providence and the power of God, which has never since my soul. That this view has perfectly set me loose from the world, and kindled in me such a love for God that I could not tell whether it had increased during the more than 40 years that I have lived since then. This attitude that he had, even before his journey of making it a practice, making it something that he consciously did, he understood that he lived within the song of God. Now, what do we mean by that? When God was asked his name in the Old Testament, he said, when Moses says, "Who are you? Who should I say sent me?" He said, "I am has sent you." And Jesus mirrors that in the New Testament when he asks, who are you? Before Abraham was, I am. And I am is what? It's everything. It's this present moment. The I am is what allows you to experience and see and know everything. That I am is God. Your existence is God. Your very being is God. And when you want to touch God, when you want to be in the embrace of God, simply sink into, relax into the present being. Don't let the mind describe it to you. Don't ask the body how it feels to you. Ignore the body, quiet the mind, and open a sense that is transcendental. It's beyond those things because it's not objective. I don't know. It's not something outside of yourself. You don't have, it's like if you want to experience your face, what can you do? You've never seen it, and yet you know you have one. God is that. God cannot be seen, but he's there as surely as your face. And you have to use the same kind of faith that you have about your face. You don't have to go and check if you have one every morning when you go look in the mirror. You just know, yeah, it's there. I've never seen it. I have no idea, what's there, but it's just there, and I know it at the core of myself. I don't have to make sure the mouth is there before I use it. And that is the meaning of faith. That is how we have to approach the divine. And it's not because it's an imagination or a made up idea of God. It's because God has no cause. You see, the mind always needs three components to conceive of anything. It needs the subject, which is you're the eternal subject. It needs an object, and then it needs the relationship between the two. And then to learn something, to know something, the mind then takes that object and the relationship to you and places it in its proper alignment with its relationship to all of the other objects that you've stored in memory. And that's classic worldly knowledge. And the knowledge of God is not that, has nothing to do with that. The knowledge of God is an undoing of all of that because he is the eternal subject. He cannot be objectified. You cannot look at him unless he incarnates, unless he gives you that favor of coming to you through your senses, which happens rarely, but does happen. But even then, What you're looking at through the senses is only a window to the reality, a window to something that cannot be limited, that cannot be expressed, that cannot be contained by anything material, anything finite. So he is saying here that he still had this relationship with this idea of God being everything around him, that there was a relationship between what he is seeing and experiencing, the divine, and himself. And so a tree in winter was able to give him a lesson so profound that 40 years later, he's not sure that he has learned anything greater than that. The idea that God is present, that God will take this dead tree and redecorate it with fresh leaves and give it a newness and a freshness when the spring comes. And somehow that touched him so deeply. And that is part of what we want to take from our brother Lawrence, is that relationship with the divine. Everything in your day is a dance step with your beloved. Everything that happens to you, everything that is said to you, everything that you see, everything that you feel, think, and imagine, all of it is in the beloved. And so to understand it, you always have to know the nature of the speaker. And the nature of the speaker of our beloved, we know from the scriptures, is love. 1 John, God is love. So everything that will happen to you today will be motivated by love. That God is your existence. You know, when he says that he puts his image in you, that you are created in the image of God, your sense of being, the fact that whenever you describe or talk about yourself, you say, I am hungry, I'm tired. So even your presence, your very being, your very existence is God. And God is omniscient. God knows everything. Psalm 139 is a wonderful thing about that. That even before your thought enters your mind and comes to your tongue, God has heard it. God has known it. And that betrays such an intimacy of sweetness. There is no hidden part of you that God does not know. There is not a single thought that you've had that God is not aware of, even before you were aware of. And in that condition, God accepts you. God embraces you. And just like here, he says that God has filled his heart with such a sense of love and such a sense of acceptance and such a love of presence that it has not diminished in the slightest in 40 years. And he knows that it's not because of him. You know, when he describes himself, he was a footman before he became a monk. I mean, that's a very humble job. It basically means he opened cab doors for rich people and then shut them. That was his whole job. And he describes himself in the next paragraph. He said that I had been a footman to M. Fubert, the treasurer, and that I was a great awkward fellow who broke everything. So he was a Gomer Pyle, you know. He was running around dropping things and breaking things. And we know that he joined the monastery for a very interesting reason. He thought that the discipline would slap him around a little bit and help him get his life together. His bumbling reality would get some order and some organization. And it's funny because he expected God to punish the daylights out of him. He expected God to really be brutal and to really, for his experience in the monastery, to be a boot camp type experience. And he said he was just continually amazed because God just poured love after love after love after love on him over and over and over, so that he felt so self-ashamed. You know, he just felt like, wait, you've got the wrong person. you don't understand. You don't know. And so that is faith, to know that God has a causeless love for us, that God has a causeless relationship with you, that God's love for you is causeless. And so you don't have to earn it, and you don't have to measure it, and you don't have to try and mete it out for yourself. It is infinite, and it is freely given in grace to you. He says in his second conversation that he had always been governed by love, that love was his primary means of deciding what to do and how to do it in everything that he did. There's a teaching in the Gita and, of course, in the Vedas and Swami Vivekananda, and Jesus mentions it also in the New Testament. This idea of karma yoga. Karma yoga is this idea of doing things for their own sake. And it's how we love God. We don't love God because. We love God because God is love. We love God because of his causeless love for us. Our love, just like our being, is a reflection of God's love. Just like our existence is a reflection of God's existence itself. And our being is that reflection of the divine. And he lived in this awareness. He said, I had been troubled in my mind from a certain belief, and now he's going to talk in third person since somebody's talking about him, that he should be damned. So he believed he should be damned. He believed that he should go to hell. I think all of us, well, I shouldn't make that assumption, but certainly I have felt that on occasion in my life. I was like, oh boy, that wasn't a good thing that I did. You know, or when I go into the shrine to do my meditations, I remember in my early years, you know, I just sit there and just, it almost was painful because I felt like, God, I'm such a hypocrite. Or, you know, I just finished doing that or thinking this or whatever. Or when you meditate, you know, when you first start meditating, that's always a big shocker, the things that start popping into your mind. And you're like, oh my God, I'm in the shrine. I shouldn't be thinking about those things, you know, but that's all that dirt of experience, all that dirt of me and mine from your life before starts bubbling up. You just let it bubble up and go. It's not you. You are of the same nature as God. Often when we think of ourselves as post Adam and Eve, meaning we think that our nature is fallen. We think that our nature is sinful and dark and dirty. Oh, I'm a sinner, I'm a sinner, I'm a sinner. If that was true, the story of Adam and Eve would not be there, because Adam is who we are and Eve is who we are before the fall. So our nature, which was there before the fall, is a nature of harmony. It's a nature of oneness with the beloved. It's a nature of innocence and freedom and purity and divinity. And only when we look at the things of the senses and the mind and think that those things, you know, when Eve looks at that apple, you remember from the class 2 years ago, when Eve sees that fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, she thought the first thing, it was pleasing to the eye. So the things of the senses, they call us, oh, that would be nice. Oh, that would feel good. Oh, I'd love to eat that. You know, so she says, and that was the second thing. The first was it was pleasing to the eye. The second, that it would look like it would be good to eat, that it would be good to take it, to do it, to participate in it. So she participates in it. And then that it would give her wisdom, that it would make her whole, that it would make her like God, which is the function of the first two. If you go into the senses, you become beguiled by the pleasures. You then are not looking at the divine. You're not being aware of being in the Garden of Paradise, where you are already like God. You are already godlike. But the nature of the senses and the nature of the mind and the beguilement begins to make you identify with the limited aspect, with the finite aspect. You begin to define yourself by adjuncts. And the soul, which is immortal and infinite, can never be content in a cage of finite things. And when you go out and try and eat that fruit, that it might make you wise, when you look for your fulfillment of identity through the body and through the mind, you will always, always, always be hungry. Always, always, always be hungry. Another name for the knowledge of good and evil is ego, because that was what was created at the moment that Eve and Adam decided to take a bite of that fruit. Ego is when you create a space for yourself that's separate and apart from God, a space where you do not believe God exists, but you exist. And that is where most of us spend our time, so that this experience of being has gotten us into a small box that we've created through the senses and mind where God is not. And then we go looking through that box, we go rummaging through that box in order to find God to return, instead of opening to the fact that we're still in the garden, that Eden is within you, the presence of the beloved, that white noise of tranquility and unchanging that you've forgotten. And so we are aware that we are in trouble. And that's the first thing that always comes to mind when we try to approach God. And we see that again in the story of Eden. When God comes walking in the cool of the day, what was the first reaction of Adam and Eve? It wasn't to run to the beloved. Oh, my beloved, it's so good to see you. I'm so glad that you're here. It was, oh my God, I just ate that apple and I now am horrified. And they run and hide. And so a lot of times when we come into relationship with God, if our faith isn't great enough, if we haven't aligned our mind properly, our first feeling is of shame and fear and separation. And it makes that intimacy very difficult. And God had to really break that down. He had to get past that somehow. He had to convince us that that wasn't the case. So he did the most extreme thing possible. He sacrificed Jesus to us. Quite often, we're of the opinion that we sacrifice Jesus, or the idea that Jesus died to pay for our sins. That's been a common idea since the 11th century, apparently. And the thing about that is that we didn't sacrifice Jesus. We killed him, but we didn't give him up. God gave him up. And when we killed him, we didn't do it as an offering to God. We did it because he made us ashamed or made us afraid or made us insecure. So it's not us who sacrificed anything to God in order to get any kind of atonement. That's not how it happened. God sacrificed Jesus to us for the distinct and sole reason of showing us that there is no limit to forgiveness, there is no limit to love, that there is no limit to his grace, and no distance that he will not travel to embrace you, to touch you, to be with you, to know you, to walk again in the cool of the garden in relationship with you. And so our practice to approach what Brother Lawrence is experiencing is to accept that and to lay down our fear, to lay down our shame, to lay down our will, to lay down everything that defines that space we create when we eat of the fruit of the senses of ego, to create a space where God is not. We have to surrender all of that in order to get that beloved embrace, to experience that beloved embrace. He said he had long been troubled in mind from a certain belief that he should be damned, that all men in the world could not have persuaded him to the contrary, but that he had thus reasoned within himself about it. I engaged in a religious life only for the love of God, and I have endeavored to act only for him. Whatever becomes of me, whether I be lost or saved, I will always continue to act purely for the love of God. I shall have this good at least, that till death I shall have done all that is in me to love him. What a beautiful response. What a beautiful ideal. His love for God was mirroring God's love for him. God had taught him how to love. It's without a cause. There is no cause. I'm not doing this to be saved. I'm not doing this to get to heaven. I'm not doing this to be a nice guy. I'm doing this because you're awesome. Because. Your love for God is an isness. It becomes an uncaused effect, as it were. Of course, in our sense, our mind can't chew on that. So God is happy enough to give us a reason. Jesus was that reason. This is why you can love me, because I first loved you. I did something that hurt me more than anything could possibly hurt me. And I did it for you, to show you that I would be willing to do that. He goes on, he says that in order to form a habit of conversing with God continually and referring all we do to him, we must at first apply to him with some diligence, But after a little care, we should find his love inwardly excite us to it without any difficulty. This is a wonderful teaching here. And the thing that's always pleasant about Brother Lawrence's teachings is that they're teachings that are already true. You're not going to have to do anything. This idea of continually being in conversation with the beloved is the reality. That I that exists within you, that listens to your ears, that looks through your eyes, that watches the thought dance through the mind, that I is the beloved. It is God. And the ego is like that little puppy that jumps up in the midstream and catches the toss of the donut that's meant for the cat, as it were. So that intimacy is already established. God felt what you're feeling at this moment first. He felt that before you did. She felt that before you did. That pain that you're feeling from that loss, that anger that you're feeling toward whoever, all of it, God experiences it before you do. You are secondary to God. And so that sharing, that intimacy, nobody you know knows you as well as the divine, because the divine is you in a sense. You are one aspect of her, one manifestation of love, one manifestation of hers. And she is so intimately aware of everything within you, every thought, every feeling, every wound, every pain, every victory, all of it. So you can share and become aware. This conversational prayer that Brother Lawrence is having is exactly that. It's an awareness of a conversation that is always happening, whether we are aware of it or not. It's a knowing and a sharing of our experience of being with the beloved, who is the being itself. He said that he expected after the pleasant days God had given him, he should have his turn of pain and suffering, but that he was not uneasy about it, knowing very well that he could do nothing of himself. God would not fail to give him the strength to bear it. So he had at first, he's talking when he first joined the monastery, he felt like, well, God's been pretty nice to me. I've really enjoyed this relationship, but I know the other shoe's going to drop. I expect, because I basically deserve damnation. I know at some point God's going to get me. So he kind of lived in that, but he said he didn't fret, because even then he kind of knew whatever he gives me, along with it will come the strength to endure it, the strength to learn from it, the strength to grow because of it, which is a beautiful commentary that Sri Nisargadatta, who's a sage that lived in Bombay in India, he makes that statement that it just left my mind. Boy, it's not going to come back. That God would always be present. Oh, he says, there it is. He says that all pain and all suffering is an invitation to inquiry, which means it's time to look at yourself. Something in there is breaking your harmony with the beloved. Anytime there's suffering, anytime there is pain, you're holding on to something that is not of an eternal nature, not of a teaching. You've taken refuge in something other than the divine nature, the divine beloved. And it always hurts. So when we lose friends, it's like, yes, that hurts, because we took solace in them, because we took refuge in them, and that refuge is now gone. And the beloved is saying to you, you see, I am your only refuge. I am the only thing that will not go away. I am the only love you will know that will never violate you, that will never betray you. And so all pain in our life, all suffering in our life, is an invitation to look for that which we are holding on to, which is not God, and to return to our one and only refuge. He said, when I failed in my duty, we'll put it in third person since that's how it's written, that when he had failed in his duty, he only confessed his fault saying to God, I shall never do otherwise if you leave me to myself. It is you who must hinder my falling and mend what is amiss. That after this he gave himself no further uneasiness about it. This is that faith in God, knowing that his love for you is uncaused and cannot be broken. When you make your mistakes, you admit your mistakes and you say, yes, you see, if I live as an ego, if I live in my box where you don't exist, there's no limit to what I can do. I really need you to reach into this box and help me, to touch me here, to help me find my way out. He says, I'll never be able to do otherwise. If I live in my box without your existence, there's no, who knows what I'll be up to. It's you who must hinder my falling. You've got to hold me. And you who must amend what is amiss. You've got to fix my thinking, my wrong ideation, my wrong understanding. And after this, he gave himself no further uneasiness about it. That's faith. That's faith. You know, how many times do we pray for something more than once? Why are you doing that? You pray once and you have faith, and you never mention it again. And when the mind, which is the duty of the mind will bring up doubt, because the mind can't understand causeless things. And so when you have faith in God, the mind brings up, hey, you know, that really hasn't happened yet. You need to ask for it again. Or, you know, ouch, this really hurts. Pray again about it. That's the mind causing doubt, the accuser coming up and questioning that which has no cause and leaving you feeling, oh, I better pray for that again. If you pray for something once, that's enough. And if the mind brings up the doubt, your response is, mine, that has already been placed at the feet of God. It's not yours to bring up again. And you live in that kind of discipline, constantly putting the mind back at the feet of the beloved, constantly remembering a causeless love that is present every moment in you. That we ought to act with God in the greatest simplicity, speaking to him frankly and plainly, and imploring his assistance in our affairs just as they happen, that God never failed to grant it as often as he had experienced. You see, God being in the moment with you, it's not just an hour of prayer in the morning or 5 minutes as we drift off to sleep at night. It's a very Western concept that we have, that there is such a thing as secular and sacred. There is not. There is only sacred. The rest is forgetfulness. There is no such thing as secular life, no matter who believes what about it. Life is spiritual because we live in spirit. We live in God. We live in the divine. There is no boundary. Your practice is your life. Your prayer is the way that you live. Everything that you do in a day is a prayer to God. You go to work, it's a prayer for money. You cook a meal, it's prayer for food. You eat 5 cakes, it's a prayer to be fat. And so what the necessity is for us to become aware of what our prayer is. Become aware of what you are praying for in everything that you do. Live consciously. Come to the moment and bring God there, bring the awareness of God there, so that you become aware of why your life is the way that it is. Because it's what you prayed for. There's this idea that God never says no to a prayer. He never says no. But he gives you his yes in the proportion in which you pray for it. Which means, like, if you pray to be a famous actor and then you don't rehearse your lines before your audition, both of those are a prayer. God will sum them together and give you the average, which may be no part in a play. And then you'll be like, God, I prayed for name and fame all my life and you've never made me famous. God says, well, you also prayed to sleep in, and you also prayed to not memorize your lines, and you also prayed not to go to the audition. So I took all of that and gave you what you actually were praying for. Because this moment that you're experiencing now is the sum total of your desires. It's the sum total of your desire. It's the yes answer to everything you have prayed for in your life. If you don't like it, become aware of how you got there and bring the beloved into your awareness so that your prayer will be different, so that your prayer will be new and refreshed. And he says to keep it in a great simplicity. This means a great sense of sincerity, a guilelessness. And what is guilelessness? It's knowing that what you're saying, what you're doing, and what you're thinking are in alignment, that the three of those things are always a straight line. That's what it is to exist with God in a simplicity and a frankness, a straightforwardness. You can't beguile God into obeying you, and you don't have to beguile God into loving you or forgiving you. God will forgive. God will love. God is present. God cannot, nor ever would, leave you. And so bring your whole self to the table. You don't have to pretend to be anybody. You don't have to list your accomplishments. You don't have to give a resume of your purity. God loves you as you are, where you are, how you are. And the more you accept that, the more you him, the more you will become like her, the more you will know love. And he says that in all of his 40 years since then, God never has broken that promise. He said, I have experienced it. God has never left me. He says that with him, the set times of prayer were not different from other times, that he retired to pray according to the directions of his superior, but that he did not want such retirement nor ask for it, because his greatest business did not divert him from God. So that he was living in that ideal, knowing that his life was prayer, knowing that there was none such thing as secular. He lived in the presence of God. Everything he did was holy. Everything that he did was an offering to his beloved. And that is the nature of it. We should see God everywhere. We should recognize his presence everywhere and in every person. As I am an image of the I am, as I am a reflection of the divine, so is the cashier behind the counter, so is the barrister at Starbucks, so is the woman who's taking my parking place in front of CVS, so is the person that just cut me off on the freeway. And we always say, always bring that awareness, be frank. So, oh, I see God. You want to cut me off today on the freeway. All right, I'll give you some room. We see God in all things everywhere, and we begin to treat all things as God everywhere. We begin to love, and the world will change around us. Our experience of being will blossom, bringing us closer to an Eden that exists within us. He says later that our only business was to love and to delight ourselves in God. To love and delight ourselves in God. So when you sit down to pray, that's your primary function, to love and delight yourself in God. Bring fun back into your relationship with God. Be mischievous, write him love notes, tease him, throw things at him, pretend that you're angry with him. All of those things. It's relationship. This doesn't have to be some pretend, sanctified, distant thing that we can hardly reach because we're so impure and so utterly disdainful. No, God is as close to you as your very own self, closer than your very best friend, more comforting than your mother. God is that. So when you go and sit in the shrine to meditate, don't wrestle with all the wrong that you've done. Don't wrestle with how deep and insincere your repentance is or isn't. Nonsense. Be with God. Delight in his presence and revel in the idea of love, and see how far you can stretch your mind to understand something that is so infinite and so immortal as love. He says in his third conversation that it was impossible not only that God should deceive, but also that he should long let a soul suffer which is perfectly resigned to him and resolved to endure everything for his sake. So this is a faith in Romans 8:28, I think it is. All things work together for good to those that love God, right, and are called together for his purpose. That's everyone. That's you and me. And it's a faith and understanding that everything that is happening to me is motivated by love from a God of love for my betterment, for my own good. That nothing is ever done with the idea of hurting or punishing or being mean or making me feel sorry. All things are done to nourish you and to bring you into the light. And that's an axiom of spiritual life. That's an axiom from which the rest of our life can be supported and built upon. So it's something to know that when you look at the world, as many of us have had to do in the last, I shouldn't go political, but when we look at the world and the world seems rather challenging, we can't imagine like, oh my, oh good, oh my, what's going on? We have to find the motive of love in all things. We have to find that motive of love. It is behind everything, Sometimes the person that's offending us, it seems distasteful to us, not because they're a bad person, but because their manifestation of love is for power. Their manifestation of love is for their own glory. Their manifestation of love is for their own gain. It's still love. It's still God shining through there. It's just that the lens of their mind has become infected with me and mine. And that's what happens. That's why the world does not strike us as holy, because all of us, being a reflection of love alone, being the product of love alone, are expressing it through a lens of mind. And when that lens is infected with ideas of me and mine, meaning my finite self, my limited being, when we express love through that finite idea of who we are, our love is limited. We can only give it to some people and not to others. We can only cast shade on some and light on others. When we free the mind of me and mine, when we get rid of that selfishness, then the light of God comes through us the same way it comes into us, in equanimity, in abundance, infinite in its measure. Just like the rain falls on the good and on the evil, so our pleasant nature and love and compassion fall on everyone. And we work to make that true, to eliminate our attachment to me and mine in all things. And sometimes God will bring people that are very challenging to our ideals into our experience of a day in order to give us the opportunity of building that muscle, practicing that faith, searching a bit deeper within ourselves to let go of the me and mine in us that allows us to disdain the me and mine being exhibited in someone else. There's a sage called the Divine Mother, Sri Sharda Devi, and she says that a baby sees no thief. If you walk into the nursery and the baby's in the crib there and you steal his diapers and run out of the room, the baby's not going to react at all. The baby doesn't care at all because the baby has no sense of me and mine for the diapers. You see, if someone walks into your room and takes your bottle of perfume or cologne off the counter and runs out, you go chasing them because you've got a sense of me and mine. The point of that is that all of the evil that you witness in the world can only be witnessed by you because it's existing in you. If it didn't exist in you, you would not recognize it. And that is why Jesus says, why are you looking at the mote in someone else's eye when you've got a log hanging out of your own eye? It's the log in your eye that's giving you the impression of a mote in their eye. If you do not have that imperfection within yourself, you cannot see it in others. And that's why it's a great practice. When you find somebody, when that particular person in the office that you just can't stand, write down all the reasons you can't stand them. And then come to a meditation about it. It's like when you're standing in line for pizza and you've counted ahead, you see, oh, there's 4 pieces of pizza in line, but you're the 5th person in line. So you watch everybody very closely. First person takes their piece of pizza. Oh, okay. Second person takes theirs. The third one takes theirs. The fourth one takes the last piece. And what's your thought? That person is so selfish, not sharing with anybody, just thinking their own self. Is it really their selfishness that's bothering you? No, in fact, it's your own selfishness because you realize you're not going to get the 4th piece of pizza. So you're projecting your shadow on someone else. And that is why the world becomes so difficult to endure. And that's why Sri Nisargadatta found out that there's a truth in the idea that all pain and suffering is an invitation to inquiry. Look within. Find your mistake, as Jesus says. Take out the mote in your own eye, and then you can see with clarity. Then you can see without a distorted lens of me and mine to truly help somebody else through love, through compassion, through grace. And so that's what his faith in God was, his understanding with God, that God would never deceive him, would never mislead him, and that any suffering that he did would be short-lived. God would never make him suffer indefinitely, but that he would endure everything anyway, regardless, because of his love for God, because of his faith that God is love. I'll love you no matter what you do. In the same way that God gave us that message through the Christ. I will love you no matter what you do to me. You can't offend me hard enough, bad enough for me to change my mind about you. I will always love you. Brother Lawrence said to his friend, he told me that all consists in one hearty renunciation of everything which we are sensible does not lead to God, that we might accustom ourselves to a continual conversation with him, with freedom and in simplicity, that we need only to recognize God intimately present with us, to address ourselves to him every moment, that we may beg his assistance for knowing his will in things doubtful, and for rightly performing those which we plainly see he requires of us, offering them to him before we do them, and giving him thanks when we have done. There's quite a few pieces in here. One hearty renunciation. Now, we have this idea sometimes of renunciation being this horrible thing because we think of it in terms of giving up what we want, giving up nice things. That's how we think of it because we haven't done discernment properly. What real renunciation is when you have a nickel in your hand and someone puts out their left hand that's empty and in the right hand they give you a $10 bill. And you have the good sense to put your nickel in their hand and take the $10 bill. That's renunciation. That's what God is talking about. He's saying all of these little things of the senses and mind that you cherish so much, that never give you anything because you constantly have to repeat them for satisfaction over and over and over again until you're exhausted. He says, give me those. And I will give you the wine that you will never have to drink twice. I will give you the water that will take your thirst forever. That's what renunciation is. Renunciation is dropping a trinket in order to get the thing itself. And so renunciation never has its eyes on what's being left behind. Mature renunciation always has its eyes on what it's running toward. And what we are running toward cannot even be said, cannot even be said. You know, the sages who have experienced God, who have experienced that union, ecstasy. And what is ecstasy? It's when you blow the circuits of mind and sense, mind and body. They can't, when the finite is put in contact with the infinite, when the blinder is taken off, the finite just freezes. The finite is destroyed. It's dropped off. There's no thinking. There's no being. You're just beyond, just beyond. I remember when I was 10 years old, I was walking in the country in Germany, and I was on this hill, and there's lots of rolling hills in southern Germany. and there was this wheat field that was still green. And it was late in the afternoon, so the sun was coming in at a sharp angle, and there was a storm coming in the sky. So the sky had these big clouds that were that dark purpley color. And the sun was coming in under the clouds and shining on the wheat that was on these rolling hills, and the wind was blowing and causing that wave-like ripple going across the wheat. And I remember looking at that as a 10-year-old, and I felt as if my whole life was like trying to breathe through a straw, that things were so beautiful that I could not possibly muster enough appreciation for how beautiful that scene was that I was looking for. I looked at it and I realized that I could never, in all of my effort, give it the appreciation that it deserved. How beautiful that scene was. And that was a wheat field in the storm. Imagine when my soul sees God. Imagine when I lay down this idea of me and mine enough to catch a vision of the beloved. That's renunciation. Renunciation is just good sense. It's just good sense. It should not be an effort. It shouldn't be some great declaration of sacrifice, because you're giving nothing in order to get everything. So that's what he's experiencing here. He has just decided that he's making one hearty renunciation. Look, Lord, I've checked this world out. I've experienced it as it is. I want you. I want you, and that's all I want. And I'm going to think of you at every moment. I'm going to accept everything you do and say to me. I'm going to know that you are immediately present with me always. And I'm going to have my life become a continual conversation with you. Not just something mental, not just something going on in my head. My actual life will become my continual conversation with you. Every DMV form that I fill out, I'm going to hand it to you. Every kitchen floor I clean, I'm going to clean it for you. Every dish I wash, I'm going to be talking with you. Every walk I take will be with you. I am yours. I'm with you. You've won my heart. I have nothing else that I want. And this is the magic of Brother Lawrence. He had good sense. He saw things as they were. He understood. He was that rich man that knew there was a treasure buried in that field. And he was the one that went and sold everything to buy it. He's like, there ain't nothing else. I'm going for it. And just like in Hafiz's poem, this is your day to see that. This retreat is that for you. We are also employed in praising, adoring, and loving him incessantly for his infinite goodness and his infinite perfection. You see, Brother Lawrence already knew God. He didn't do all of these things in order to learn of God. He had accepted some axioms about God and had taken him into his heart and accepted them as true, and his life was lived in response to that. But we'll stop there and pick up again this afternoon around 2 o'clock. So this chant, it says, may there be well-being in all, may there be peace in all, may all be fulfilled, and may there be auspiciousness in all. Sarvesham svastir bhavatu, sarvesham shantir bhavatu, sarvesham purnam bhavatu, sarvesham mangalam bhavatu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace.